A very good afternoon to all the participants who are gathered here for attending a topic on bias in research. Before going into the topic, I'd like to introduce the speaker for today's session. He is Dr. Prakash V. He completed his bachelor's and master's from Chennai and PhD from Gujarat. Currently, he is working as a professor in MGM Institute of Physiotherapy, Maharashtra. His area of expertise is community mobility, patient-centered outcome measurement, implementation science. He has got some lot of achievements on his basis. Some of them are he has developed and validated the Indian stroke scale. He is recognized as a highly cited scientist in the Stanford University's top 2% scientist list for the last three consecutive years. He is a senior collaborator of Global Burden of Disease Network. He is also the recipient of Young Investigator Award from World Stroke Organization from Switzerland. Adding to this, he has got the 30 publications and its H index is 15. More number of articles are cited for his research. I welcome you, sir, for this session. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bala, for inviting this talk. Without wasting time, we will straight away on to the presentation. Today's talk is on bias in research. Bias is something that we have used this word very commonly to our professional practice or day-to-day life and so on. And especially when we feel we've been unfairly treated, we tend to say someone is biased against you, the system is biased, and so on and so forth. So, what we're going to discuss today is bias in research specifically. What exactly that I mean that is when we say someone is biased, something is biased or the system is biased, it means that there is a sense of unfairness and also unfairness that doesn't help us to find out what this actually is. Right. So that's the idea in research, how bias may manifest, and I will also discuss how bias may influence the results of the research, and also make some quick suggestions on how can we minimize its effect. Right. So, as I'm assuming most of you are postgraduate students, so why should we know about bias specifically? So, the question is the students. At the postgraduate level, there are two things we will be required to do. One is to do research, and second is to read a lot of research, to do journal books, literature review for your dissertation, and so on and so forth. So when we read research, we look for effect of a treatment. The study concludes that a particular treatment is effective, useful, and then we cite that in our research stating that so and so was found this is an effective treatment. And also in our clinical practice, many of us come across, and there is a new study that supports this new treatment. So I'm thinking I want to try it. When we make such statements, when we interpret a research finding as a gospel truth, what we are not realizing is that research results are not true by such. All research are influenced by bias. There is no way study results can be completely out of the realm of bias. So that means, so what do we mean by it is biased? Means what we take as truth, the conclusion are not completely true. So when we say something is completely true, we're asking is it partially true or completely wrong? My point is it can be all. Right? So what we need to do here is So
So
what we need to do, yeah,
a little bit mic closer. Mic. Yeah.
can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
right. So what I mean by that is all research are influenced by when we do research, the key is we need to know to what extent results are influenced by us so that we interpret the results accordingly. That's the whole idea of knowing. We can't totally remove most of those. Right? So that is why we need to learn about bias. Any research that you come across or any research that you do, the research can, of course, be results. We often think research can, other research can only be influenced by bias, and our own research cannot be influenced by bias. So we tend to conclude like this is everything, right? It is not so. Obviously, our research can also be influenced by us. Right. So this is just an example of a plant and the elephant. I'm sure most of you might have heard this story. When you are doing research, you need to understand this is what we are trying to figure out. We try to figure out a particular treatment is effective or not, or a particular problem exists or not. What are the factors influencing? When we try to do that, either if you're reading research or doing research, we are all basically like these blind men trying to figure out what an elephant is. Uh, and that, okay, obviously, if we are not blind, so we'll be able to understand elephant as self. So this blinding that what is the blinders that is tied around the head, eyes, or the biases. So by knowing about what they are, so or by removing as much as we can get close to bias. I'm sorry, we can get close to truth. That's the whole point I'm trying to make. So just remember, whenever you're reading research or doing research, we are blinded. But most of us does not realize it. This presentation is to send that point across that we all are blinded. And we need some tools to unblind ourselves. Okay, so this just what exactly we mean by bias. As I told you before, we use the term bias to refer to many things, but here in research, what we mean by bias is deviation of research from the truth. So that's why when we read a study results or conclusion, we should not take it as truth. We should know that how much far away research is away from the truth. If you know that, then some results are very close to the truth, some results are very close to the truth. And so that is where we should be focusing on when we read research, not just the conclusion. We need to know how far away this truth is. Right. So what happened with what is the effect of bias? We have a broad understanding it can be wrong if we study research. But to be specific, the bias can have an impact on the research in two ways. Either it can overestimate or underestimate the truth. We might find a treatment effective when it is not actually effective. We may also find a treatment ineffective when they're actually effective. Both can have a detrimental effect on practice, as most of you can understand. So you should be careful that the results are not either overestimated or underestimated. And also, we need to keep in mind that bias effects can manifest in a study before, after, and during the study also. We'll get to that little later. So here is an example of how bias can influence our interpretation. This is a study that we conducted in this graduate project. So we basically asked a group of researchers to read two results of a systematic review in simple language. So in one of the systematic review, a treatment, a commonly used physiotherapy treatment, is concluded that the treatment is not effective. In uh, another review, a commonly used treatment is found to be, it is concluded as effective. Both are published studies. What we found that when we asked physiotherapists to interpret, physiotherapists tend to agree when the review results are positive, but if it shows that what is effective. But many of them disagree, nearly about 60% of the people disagree with the evidence when it shows that it's not beneficial. As you can see, the bias is not only in the study, only with the researchers. The bias is also with the people who read research. Now, somehow, as a physiotherapist, they are not inclined to accept that treatment that is commonly used is not effective, even though evidence is clearly pointing to that it's not working. So, what I'm trying to convey is that bias can influence the researchers, the readers, and the participants, everybody involved in research and a final um, in consumers all are influenced. So in order to be less influenced, then you have to be aware. Able to follow themselves. So as I told before, there are many stages this bias can enter into research, even before conducting the research, like when you're doing literature review. So which is very common, many of you already know, is that we tend to do cherry picking, meaning we tend to identify studies that are supporting our hypothesis and include only those in our literature review. And we will avoid or we will not use or cite those studies that doesn't agree with our preconceived hypothesis and conclusions. Even while designing many of us, there's quite a lot of bias can enter into the designing stage because sometimes we design studies that are convenient to us, not necessarily that involves less bias. But as you can see, if you focus more on convenience, you're obviously compromising truth or the efforts to find truth. After completion of study, also, I point out how come study results study can be biased after completion of the survey. But there is quite a few. One is known as publication bias. It means that people often tend to publish in studies that concentrate is effective and not published studies that are ineffective. That means a lot of ineffective research not published at all. So when you search, you would see only positive studies. That's another problem. So that means there's some bias can enter into study at all levels. So we should be careful about that. This is an example of publication bias. You can see that out of 30 studies, 15 positive trials and 15 negative trials. But what is published is actually more positive trials than less negative trials. And it's done. So we will end up showing that most studies are positive. That means the treatment is effective because many negative trials are not published. Now, to further emphasize the problem of bias in research, as you can see, these are the 5 important reasons why the research that is conducted is verified. Between waste issues, as you can see, but 2 reason is 50% of studies do not take adequate steps to reduce bias. So that again emphasizes the problem of bias. And the fifth one is related to publication bias, that people are not publishing into trials, and also even when they publish, they don't really report clearly what they do. So again, it becomes useless. Right. Okay. So far, I discussed about what is bias in research, and how it influences my perception, and how from researchers, participants, even consumers of this, people like us, all of us can be biased, right? And how it can influence the business, like overestimate, underestimate the truth, both can have a best influence on our studies. So if you follow so far, I hope you're convinced. And this is really a bigger problem. So what can we do? The obvious question comes, how can we eliminate bias from research? But we need to understand that we can't eliminate bias from research. We can't totally remove it. What we can do is to minimize its effect. How can we do this? First, we need to become aware of common biases in research, our own biases too. And that's the first step. I think we become aware of all these things. So, say for example, like in the previous study, I told that people tend to look at studies that shows positive effect favorably, and studies that shows negative effect, that doesn't reduce their agreement. So next, whenever we are reading a study that shows feasibility is not working, we should be aware that we are becoming biased. We need to take additional steps to read more carefully before disagreeing with the evidence. Yeah. Next is there is a lot of study design level features that we can improve by minimizing it. I'll explain these things later. More some of this, say, for example, randomization, blind to it. So while designing a study, we must ourselves what are the common biases that can come into the study and what steps can I take to minimize it. Finally, okay, even as observed, there is biases can't totally eliminated. So even if you've taken all the efforts and there are still biases can influence, okay. So if I can know how much is biased, that will allow you to interpret accordingly. So we should overestimate the effect of it. So to learn about bias, various types of bias. Okay, this is a short talk on making you aware of bias, not a full-length course on various biases. So I'm not going to explain much of it, but those who are interested, they look into this bias, catalog of bias on website. You can see all types of bias. Next one, to design study pages. Be more specific if you use some, if you want to be fair, if you start from that point, many biases can automatically be. And also, as a researcher or as someone who reads research, we should be motivated by finding the truth rather than what we want to find, what makes me feel better. That would help you, or how I can publish the study, how I can complete the study. You're driven by that, you will invariably bias will come in stage. These are some very well known features to reduce bias, randomization, blending, intention analysis, and statistical procedure. So these are all things that you can do to minimize bias from your study. This is an example. And the third one I've said that we should be able to estimate the effects of bias on the study results. This is one example. You will see this in the corporate review mostly. Um, you can see that green means low risk of bias, red means high risk of bias, and yellow means unclear risk of bias. These statistics, you can see that about 10 to 75% of the studies does not clearly describe allocation concealment and so on and so forth. These are all easily reducible, manageable, but researchers often fail to explain or fail to report this, and it leads to a lot of biases in the study. Right? So if there is a study having a lot of bias to bias, that means the study results are not something we can rely on. So we can't, irrespective of whether it shows positive or negative effect. What's an example of how biases are represented in the system systematic review? More green means less risk of bias, more red is high risk of bias. Well, it's unclear. You can see that some studies are really, really good. Say, for example, Literary 2017 has taken quite a lot of foot in this bias, even though they did not really explain some outcomes. And if you see this one is different than this language. A lot of bias bias. These I think they could have easily avoided. But that means that becomes a research waste, as I pointed out earlier. So that shows the importance of bias and why we should be aware of it. The direction bias I portrayed to that it can have both ways. You can have positive bias, negative bias, meaning you may underestimate or overestimate study results. It's a simple thing that shows how bias can influence. See, the blue line, blue circle in here is the one side, that is the truth, let us say. So when we do study or something like that, we want our studies to be close to it. Get that. As you can see, high precision low bias means we are very close to the actual truth. So this is what we should aim for when you're conducting a study. So when you're designing, basically, when you're conducting a study, you should focus a lot of work on designing, not just the data collection, what I will collect data or you spend a lot of time in designing a study. Basically, you need to ask yourself, so, okay, where are the found sources of bias in my study now and conclude? It's as simple as that. If you take that effort, your study is likely to be less biased. Right. So we come to the end of this short talk. Basically, as I talked about, as human beings, we are all biased. So we are biased by our knowledge, or knowledge doesn't really bias. Sometimes it actually has a lot of bias. We are biased by our knowledge, experience, identity, culture, and many more things. So if you don't look at things as it is, you look at from that perspective of who we are, our base religion. So that's why many people interpret the same thing in different ways. But what we need to understand, the truth is you can see the truth only when we manage to be objective. What I mean by objective doesn't mean numbers. Objective means where you are aware of the bias. If you take efforts to bias, then you can actually see the truth. Okay? So it all comes down to whether we want to know the truth. So if you're driven by finding the truth, you will recognize the bias that prevents us from seeing the truth. This stays in research because in research we are trying to find out what is the truth, which treatment works, which treatment doesn't, which factors leads to a problem, which factors doesn't lead to a problem, and so on and so forth. Which is a good test, which is a good test also. So all these questions, if you are driven by finding out what is true, you will recognize what are the bias and you will take efforts to minimize its effect. Okay, that's all I have. So if you have any questions, you can ask.
Yes, sir. Now the forum is open for the questions from the students, the participants. Any questions from the participants?
So, any other ways to reduce the biases?
Can you be a little bit more specific? Why you find whatever I explain is not enough?
Sorry, sir, you are not audible.
Can you hear now?
Did you hear?
Yeah.
Sir, it's echoing your voice.
Okay. Not so sure. But anyways, if you ask a question a little bit more specific, I might be able to answer. Because this talk is not about listing all the biases, but to understand how bias can influence research and understanding of research.
If you want, you can type the question also. Huh? In the chat box, you can type the question. So I will answer that. Prakash sir, we have got Manoj sir also there.
Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you
Yes, sir.
for accepting our invitation. I'm good. Nice. I'm good to hear you
Me too, sir.
after long.
Okay, during the pre-trial, what are the biases? Um, as I pointed out, when you're doing research, even when you're doing literature search, literature review, all these stages, bias can come in. Say, for example, if you're not searching in using a properly developed search strategy, you may need to choose research that supports your findings, supports your pre-existing hypothesis. Even that can also influence. So if you have not read all the articles that are related to your study, because very often students ask in literature review, how many articles we should include in literature review. My common answer is all the studies that are done in that area should be included. Because if we have not read all the studies, how would we know that what, what we know and what we don't know? So we often try to say 10 articles, 20 articles, that is only for 10 minutes. We cannot try to find something without knowing what we already know. So if you're taking a shortcut over there, you only choose few articles. That's another bias. Free trial.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, this is a big question. How do we minimize our own bias? Uh, Simple thing, you can start off with recognizing what all our biases are. That's important. And I think we should read more about biases. The website I've shared, we spend a lot of time. We will realize many such types of biases that can creep into our thinking or research.
I've got one question. Like when the students are planning for the research areas, how they can think to reduce or prevent the biases in getting the articles or how to plan out the research studies.
Well, like I said, they have to start off knowing what are the biases. If we don't know what are the biases, we will not even recognize when we are biased. So they need to learn about all possible bias. Say, for example, but they need to know what is a selection bias. They need to know what is the publication bias. They need to know what is an attrition bias. So start by knowing all types of bias that are seen. So that's the first step. And secondly, again, like I pointed out, when you're doing research, we need to be driven by finding the truth rather than completing research as some task or assignment or you want to submit. If you're driven by how submission goes, then we'll take a lot of shortcuts that will allow many biases to come into the research.
Okay. And any other questions from the participants? Sir, you have any questions, sir?
No, I do not have any questions. I thank everyone and especially Dr. V. Prakash for extending his expertise for our students. And I would love to see him here personally I'm inviting him for sparing some days, maybe 2-3 days,
Sure,
where he can
sure.
come and
Always a
let you
pleasure
know.
meeting you.
Yeah,
And
we'll make some time and invite.
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
We'll catch up.
I think for the summary of the what Dr. Prakash has given, the thing is that just he's given the outline about the biases in the research part of it, and what are the various ways steps how we can minimize it. Or one thing is what he has said is that we can't do research without the bias, but at least we can minimize the bias in our research. That is, I think, the take-home message, and we can work on the areas of how we can do the research with the minimum bias. And I think that's it. One more question, I think.
Um, okay. Precision high precision wire there. Okay. That is actually it mixes of bias and also when we're talking about precision, we're talking about the confidence interval and so on. So we think yes, it has got to do with sample size. Because smaller the sample size, less precision we will have standard. So it's not contradictory. Let us say, for example, you can have a really large sample size study which will lead to high precision, but there can be a lot of bias in such studies methodological. So that's why you can have a high precision and high precision and high bias. Similarly, low precision, high precision and low bias, both are possible, right? So one is got to do with methodology, other got to do with these sample size. We can really have a bigger study with lots of bias.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable time. On behalf of the BGPL College of Physiotherapy and the principal, we'd like to thank you for giving your time for the session. Thank you, sir, and thank you to all
Thank
the
you.
participants.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Dr. Bala, Dr. Sir. It's a pleasure. Bye.
Bye.